just so you know, we're recording. So if you do not have your mics on mute, please do so because we will pick up everything in the background. Good morning and welcome to this session of the RDS training. We have Mr. Gene Ritter from North Carolina State Education's Assistance Authority, who is going to provide this training for us. Also attached in the calendar invite should be 3 documents. It should be the presentation, the RDS presentation, the RDS guidebook, and the campus responsibilities guide. Just know if you have any questions or comments, please unmute yourself and ask, or put it in the chat box and I will read them off to Mr. Ritter for his response. We will provide time at the end also for questions in case you have them. So just know, if you are not muted, please do so now because I'm hearing background noise, and I'll go ahead and mute people also if I need to. But with that being said, Mr. Ritter, I will leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you. Hello all. I see a lot of names in there that, you're not new, but we have some updates. But we have a lot of new staff at some of the colleges, so I was asked to do kind of a combination of a basic overview as well as highlighting some changes in the last year or so. So give me a second, let me pull up a presentation here.
Yeah, look at like the third generation and highlighting, and like you can just look at them. Yeah, every single one of them, like.
Okay, y'all should be seeing that now, right?
Shit, yeah, like it's all just been.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great. All right, so again, welcome. A lot of you we've spoken already on the phone, but my name is Gene Ritter. I'm the program manager at SCAA that oversees the RDS process. And we're gonna, as I said, because we have a lot of new folks at some colleges, I'm gonna quickly run through some of the basic requirements by law. I'm gonna give you helpful hints from what we see at the RDS side of common issues or problems, how to help students with that, their options if they get a non-resident, and some tips for supporting them. And then get into highlighting some recent changes in the last couple of years, and then give you some resources. So as Monty mentioned, already went out to you attached to this are a copy of this presentation, so you don't have to frantically copy down. And I put it in a lot of detail so you can hopefully use it as a reference if you need to, save this PowerPoint slides. And then the official guidebook, which is the public document that explains the residency requirements and special situations. And basically it's kind of the Bible that our team uses to process, and it's cross-referenced with law. And there's a campus responsibility guide that gets into the nitty-gritty of, and we're going to go through that in more detail. I'll give you a high-level view of like campus exceptions, tracking responsibilities for a campus, things that are housed at the campus end. Okay, and then we'll look at resources and then take Q&A. So if you're new and don't know this, I mean, most states have, as North Carolina does, a lower tuition rate for people that meet certain residency requirements. And traditionally that was handled at each campus level, but back in 2013, the legislature directed that there be one centralized service. That's something that arose from within the legislature and some committees. Apparently some of them had sons or daughters that had applied to multiple institutions and were getting different determinations, and some of them had pages of paper to fill out. Other of them, they just asked 2 questions and they were in, kind of thing. They felt there was not consistency. So the players in this case are SCAA, that's me, is the authority named in statute to manage and operate the system. We contract that out to CFI, the Residency Determination Services. My background is actually, I came here through the community college system. I was hired by CFI and was part of the team to get the system ready, launch it. I was operations manager for a while and then came over to SCAA. So you'll hear different entities involved, but that's the relationship there. So the basic requirements really haven't changed much since the 1970s. They've been around for a while. People think, oh, it's all new because, RDS. The statutes have been around. There's been minor changes, usually some exceptions here and there. But the biggest things to keep in mind is it says they have to be domiciled here and have a preponderance of evidence, meaning it can't be a temporary residence. Someone who's here temporarily working for a year or going to school here with the intent of going back to their quote home is not a permanent residence. So it has to be a permanent, and the law says for these purposes, you can only have one primary or permanent residence. We have people that try to use like a vacation home at the beach or mountain saying, but I've owned this home for 20 years. Yeah, but you're there 6 weeks of the year. What's your primary residence? The other thing that causes some of our younger students grief is the law says that it presumes that wherever, if you have a living parent or court-appointed guardian, wherever they are is where you're domiciled. Okay, if it's North Carolina, it's North Carolina. If not, it's another state, unless you can prove that you meet all the criteria, including financial independence, meaning you have to be able to show you can meet the majority of your educational and living expenses on your own merit. Now, there's some leeway in that, but like we will consider if someone has financial aid that isn't something co-signed by a parent, we will count that toward it's on their own merit. If they have a scholarship at a university, same thing. So there's possibility, but students who work in the summer and made $2,000 and they're attending university and their tuition's $30,000 a year, that's not covering the majority. A key thing to understand is they don't have to, by this legal definition, be living with the parent or guardian. That's different for K through 12, who classify them if they're not under the same roof as McKinney-Vento and they're homeless or unaccompanied. The parent can literally be living next door, and we've had that. But by these definitions, that does not override this for tuition. So if they share with RDS any special circumstances, like we've had someone say, my parent's incarcerated. Okay, if we could look that up, or I'm not living with my parent, we don't have a good relationship. If they can give us any information and we can verify the parent is physically living here, they're usually good to go. Okay, so that's a big distinction. The other is that students often try to come through and say, I really want to be independent, I'm 18 now. Well, we've had students 16, 17 try to state that unless they have a court order of emancipated minor, they can't legally. So when they turn 18, they can begin to establish, a domicile, but they have that 1 year waiting period. But again, they're going to have to show independence as well. So those are the legal constraints we have. There are, however, a lot of special provisions in law for students in certain circumstances. RDS will screen for these. Students sometimes say, well, how come the person next to me was only asked 4 questions and I got 20? The way the system's devised is that it's going to ask for the most common things first. And if you say yes to a number of them, you're done. It doesn't make you answer every conceivable exception. If you say no, it keeps going to try to find a way to qualify you. So if a student can't pass on the, let's say, driver's license, vehicle, employment, taxes, voter, we'll even take things like food stamps, Medicaid, as evidence of domicile here. If they say no to everything, it will go through some of these exceptions. So RDS will screen for these. I want to comment on 2 of them very quickly is the living long-term with an adult relative. So it's not uncommon that students grow up and it's another family member raising them. Maybe they've been living with an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent. There is a provision as long as it's at least 5 years if the parent is in another state. If it's long-term, there's a provision. It can be a succession of, it could be different relatives. So RDS can screen for that. Finally, I want to say something about the active duty military families. This applies to active duty military who are stationed in North Carolina currently, okay? But they're claiming another state as their permanent residence. So they wouldn't qualify for residency. There is a provision that they can get in-state tuition as well as the immediate family, the spouse or eligible dependents, if they are also here, that RDS can screen for. They're not a resident. They're going to get that out-of-state resident, but in-state tuition. But there's no other requirement. So RDS can screen for that. We collect the orders, you know, they're done, they're in, versus we're going to talk about veterans later, where the other exceptions that fall to the campus, it's because there's other requirements that the campus has to verify, because they're usually done on a term by term or year by year basis. They have to meet additional requirements, including financial ones. So there's no way for RDS to know, but that one is one RDS will screen for. So important distinction is, that's why you sometimes see RDS talk about out, out, or in, is the first of those is residency. By law, only RDS can change a residency determination. However, campus-based exceptions will change the tuition. That second one, like that out in, is one we give globally for the active duty station here, because there's no other requirement. They don't have to be using a benefit, or someone else isn't paying the bill, that kind of thing. But it doesn't, you know, those exceptions don't change the residency. That's a very important distinction, because when that exception expires, they revert to the out-of-state determination, but also for purposes of state grants and scholarships. Separate statutes govern that they have to fully meet residency criteria. They cannot be awarded based on a tuition exception. So they're not a resident. They're just getting a tuition exception. That's why it's important to distinguish between the two. There are a couple of campus-based exceptions across sectors. And by the way, everyone uses the system. UNC, community college system, and the private and independent universities, while they don't have a tuition differential, students who qualify for a state grant must come through RDS. So they're involved in this too. Okay, so all students must use this. There are some here that apply across sectors. The first is veterans. We talked about that. Get a lot of questions about this on a regular basis. Basically, if you have a veteran or family member with a benefit and they qualify for in-state, you don't need to do any special RDS issue with residency or billing rates, because the system considers them an in-state resident. This applies to a veteran or an eligible family member that has been assigned a benefit. And if they're assigned one of those eligible benefits, okay, by federal law, it governs, and the conditions of which, that if they are using a benefit, they need to be charged the in-state tuition. So at that point, the campus can, you know, give them that exception. However, they must be using the benefit that term. If the benefit is not available to them, or we've had students say, I don't want to use it now, there is no provision just because someone was a veteran. And we've had people challenge that, but the VA has given us guidance that no, you know, to be eligible for that exception, unless the state provides something on their own in law, which it doesn't exist, as long as they use the benefit. If they say, I don't want to use it, or it's used up, they need to revert to the out-of-state. They also, by the way, are supposed to sign a statement that they're in the process of establishing domicile in North Carolina. So in theory, this shouldn't go on long-term. And once they become residents, you wouldn't need to track them for the tuition rate exception. The next one is actually written in the community college system. We're going to go through the list, but has a list of possible campus exceptions that's longer. UNC system only has two. This is one of two. Is certain full-time employees. And it was determined a couple years ago, JW worked with the general counsel there at the system office, that it didn't exclude that the community colleges couldn't grant this, so they will. However, you need to follow the requirements that the UNC has in the system. This is not anyone who's a UNC employee. Basically, it's meant for full-time regular employees of the UNC system. The question came up recently of someone who worked in another part of the state for one of the UNC, you know, health clinics in the community. They're not eligible by UNC's definition, so therefore they wouldn't. Students, graduate students that are assistants or fellows or someone on work study is not considered eligible. It's got to be a regular full-time employee. So the guidebook will go through that, but it's only certain folks, and they have requirements. They have to, for example, be living in North Carolina. We've had some that live in South Carolina or Virginia and commute. They're not eligible, and that's again, by UNC and the statute's definition. So the campus guide can walk you through that, but I wanted to make a mention of that. I don't think you'll get a lot of these folks other than the people in the local, like healthcare system trying to use this, but it's meant for regular university employees. And there are some UNC system hospitals, teaching hospitals, and they're mentioned in the guidebooks about which ones are eligible. If you have questions, you get to one of those, we're happy to help you sort that out, but it's not anyone that has like a UNC health system or a part-time student kind of thing. Finally, there's the statutory grace period. And again, we'll go into more detail in the next session, but what this helps is a student who already has an in-state determination from RDS, they've enrolled at your college, and you become aware that there's been a change in their circumstance. Maybe they tell you, I'm going to change my permanent address because we've moved to Virginia, can I take online classes? Okay. Or a student who has a visa who's expired, who has not been renewed yet. If they got in, again, it doesn't apply to exceptions, and they have already been attending, you can work with RDS to put them on a grace period to keep that in-state rate for up to 12 months of when the change occurred. So if they told you they moved July 1st, they get 12 months from that July 1st date. Okay. So these are ones that can be handled in either sector, the UNC or community college system. And then, of course, if you have any of the waivers like senior and all that, sometimes I get questions, but that's simply a tuition waiver. You would handle that, in your business office or whatever your campus procedures are. So here's a list. I'm just going to comment briefly on these. These are detailed in that campus responsibility guide that was sent out of what the requirements are, what documentation you need, how long it's good for, and how to track these students. But very briefly, business sponsored is when you have a UNC or a North Carolina employer who agrees in writing to pay 100% of the bill directly to the college. They're sending someone for training. Okay. That has to be looked at every term. If they do it for one term and the student's non-resident, they don't keep the in-state rate. It's handled as a tuition adjustment. By the way, I will mention that is one of only 2 scenarios where I know you could conceivably have a student, let's say, who doesn't have an immigration status like DACA, and they could, by the wording of the statute, use that if they're sending them for training. The other is active duty military. The service member or anyone, if they're active duty stationed here, they do not have to hold an eligible immigration status. That's the only one. The others do require, some degree of immigration documentation if it's a non-resident. The business military transfer families, I would say if it's active duty military, go that route. Don't, because otherwise you're creating a headache to transfer. This one gets a little trickier because this is if a company transfers someone to North Carolina and they have a presence here, but you're only allowed, for example, 1% of your out of state enrollment per semester on these exceptions. So again, we'll go into the details next session if you're into that. Sponsored by a nonprofit, this isn't going to help like the DACA student or someone like that, again, who doesn't have a lawful entry. The non-citizen public high school graduates, this gets into that discussion we had about a year ago about they had to have been lawfully admitted. Maybe they don't have a current status now, or they're lawfully admitted, but it's a visa type that's not eligible for permanent residence. You can make some exceptions. Refugees, getting a lot of questions about refugees now because folks are arriving that are from Afghanistan or the Ukraine. This only applies if U.S. immigration classified them as a refugee. Most of the current arrivals are not being classified as refugees. Where this will help is the refugee is eligible for RDS purposes. However, they have to be here 12 months. This would help the student who has refugee status who hasn't been here 12 months yet. The next one, I don't think you'll have a lot of. This is someone who has applied for a green card, permanent resident, immigrant status, but it has not been approved yet. RDS will take their first step of that, the application. Once the application is approved, and with some other confirmation and approve them before they have the green card in hand. This is someone who's applied. It's likely that you won't get a lot of these because usually, depending on what their path is, they'll get them pretty quickly because you can't just come into the country and apply for a green card. You have to have had another status and have a path to it. Usually it's immediate family members, the most common. Law enforcement, there's a provision in there. If they're federal and stationed here, again, it's going to help them with the duration issue. And the most recent, the newer one, is there was a petition that the system office got through that will allow U.S. citizens who are public high school graduates a tuition exception. However, the most they would go with that is it's good for 1 year from the graduation date only. So hopefully, you know, the idea is they're going to have to meet the requirements. Okay. So again, we'll go into far more detail in the next session. We'll go through each one of these because they all have different requirements and they're good for varying lengths of time. Like that last one's only good for 1 year from graduation. If they come 2 years later, they're out of luck for that exception. So some quick tips is generally the student where the parent's not here is going to have to be 19 because they won't gain the legal ability to establish a separate domicile till they're 18. So that 12 months. They don't have to be living with them. So if they tell us, you know, I'm not living with my parent, but there is a parent in North Carolina, you know, and they can give us any information on it, that's their quickest path through. And finally, I don't know how to emphasize this enough. If you don't have the information, don't keep going and skip over everything. That's one of the biggest problems we see. So what are the top reasons they're on their initial getting out of state? The number one continues to be they keyed in the wrong social or date of birth. We asked for it twice, but a lot of them will still key it in wrong. We'll take that, but then when it goes out for validation, it doesn't validate with state agencies. And for those of you that are new, almost all information is validated electronically. Like last October, when we had the college app season for seniors, I think it was less than 5% were asked for a document. And we only do that when in an IC when it's something we can't do, like we need a current military order or to see their immigration document, or if it's a court document. So if you key in wrong information, it's going to come back saying, we can't find this person. Skipping too many things, saying no to everything. A lot of them just give their name and address and think, well, that's good enough. And if you say no to everything, we assume maybe you just got here and you're not going to qualify. Or keying in any other information. There has to key in like a driver's license number, or vehicle number, or whatever, something. If they have 3 or 4 things and one of them is wrong, that's not going to be a problem. They'll probably get approved. But if there's nothing to go on, that right there, those first 3 probably represent about 70% of the students that have to come back. That's how common it is. Students wanting to claim independence but have no income. If that happens and they go through the system and they don't qualify for an exception, then they get a message saying it doesn't look like you're qualifying. You would need to use your parents. Do you want to do that? Otherwise, you're probably going to be out of state. And they have the choice. If they say, yes, I'll give parent information, it will allow them to give it. But a lot of them hit no. A lot of students, when they come back, say, well, I don't want to use my parent information. I want to be independent because I'll probably get more financial aid. Well, for residency purposes, if they can't show independence now, they've got to. So, and then, of the reasons other than immigration thing, it's mostly that if a family just moved here 3 months ago, it's going to kind of end the interview because, there's not much you can do if, they haven't met the 12 months legally. In terms of what types of information, I'm not going to go through this, but we have a lot of tools on the website. This is, for example, a good chart that we've given for high school counselors about what information they need to fill out FAFSA and what RDS uses. And if you see, it's pretty similar. We will ask more information about immigration because while for federal financial aid, it's very limited to basically permanent residents, asylees, refugees, and there's a couple of visa types. There are a lot more visa types that we will take as eligible in the guidebook. In fact, a lot more than most states will take for tuition purposes. So we will ask that information. So in using the online system, it's, for those of you new, it's computer-based. It's kind of similar to like a tax prep program like, TurboTax. It uses skip logic. It's going to ask a series of questions, and depending on how you answer, it's going to take you to a different place or module. So are you a U.S. citizen? If you say yes, it's going to skip immigration. If you say no, it's going to take you to get information about your immigration status. If you're a non-resident but in the military, it's going to take you to a military module and so forth. Student receives an RCN or residency number. They keep that for life. So if they come back 8 years later and say, I want to go to graduate school now, they will log in and just update the information. They keep the same number. Those determinations, once they're made, are sent in real time to a server that your college pulls from. At the same time, they're sent immediately to the state grant system. If the student on the initial consideration, which by the way, I think something like 80% of students pass through and we never even look at. If they give the information that validates with agencies electronically online, they pass, they go through. If they don't, and they feel it's incorrect, they can do a reconsideration or appeal. And the system, when they log in, will walk them through the difference and how to do it or what's available to them now. When they come in at that level, especially in an appeal, if we think they might qualify for any campus-based exception, we would tell them to talk to their campus to see if they do. The basic difference between reconsideration and appeal is that reconsideration is they're put through the interview again, asking for more information. Or someone, for example, who hadn't met the 12 months, 3 months later, they do now, they can give their reason for the reconsideration is I've met the duration now. Okay. Appeal doesn't put them through the whole interview, but they write up an appeal statement about what their circumstance is. It's not a faster way through. If they have more information, it's better for them to do the reconsideration because it might validate electronically. On the appeal, if you say, I have more information I didn't give you, the interview doesn't take them through that, so we're going to have to ask for documents. If all that fails, there is a final level that can come that gets submitted after RDS appeal to SEAA, and they have to make a case for why they think they qualify and RDS made a mistake. You know, just simply, we get students to say, I don't agree with the 12-month requirement, or it's unfair that I'm a DACA, person and I can't get in state. That's not going to be a basis. I mean, if the law says that, then the law says that. But if a mistake was made, it goes for a final review. The students, when they log in the system, a lot of times they hear, oh, they don't know this or they don't know that. They can always see this dashboard, and it tells them, in this case, were you considered a North Carolina resident, yes or no? Eligible for tuition, yes or no? Has it been validated yet? If they owe documents, that little text box in blue turns red, and it tells them what they owe. The system, by the way, automatically generates reminders if they haven't finished a determination or they owe a document or anything like that. They get 4 reminders with the due date. If they disagree, there's a button at the bottom to do a reconsideration appeal, and it walks you through the difference and helps them decide which is best for them. Some suggestions for helping students. Again, we have an RDS student call center. They can call and the staff can get in there. They can tell them what screen they're on. They can help them with answering questions. But the number one issue is I can't remember a login or password. When they set up their account, they can set up security questions so they can retrieve it. A lot of them don't. So, I mean, at that point, they're going to have to call in. We're going to have to get information to verify their identity. Asking about the status, asking about options. Again, they can see some of that online. How to correct information they entered an error, understanding particular questions about the effective date. Effective date, from our perspective, is always the date they come through the system, okay, that they submit. Now, once a term has begun, will it be effective that term? That's up to the policy of the college. Some colleges go later than others in terms of will they retroactively change it or will it go into effect the next term? So if the term's in progress, we refer them to the campus to find out how will they handle that. Some of this we talked about is the login, the password issue. Make sure that if you're working with the student, emphasize to record this information. make sure that their social date of birth especially is accurate. Don't skip every question. They can save wherever they are and go back later. There's a lot of tools on the RDS public website, including a lot of handouts for specific issues or situations. And I gave one example, a student who's a US citizen who's dependent on their parents who may not have a status or don't want to share information. There's suggestions how best to come through the system. There's a lot of handouts out there designed for students, parents. Several are translated into Spanish. There's some for, as I say, a variety of scenarios that are common scenarios we see. Please have them give parent or guardian information. They'll try to give their, boyfriend, girlfriend, roommate, cousin, whatever. It's not going to work. And if they have special circumstances, if need be, they can come back and explain them. But, we can, as I say, as long as the parent is physically residing in North Carolina and we can verify it, that would help them immensely if they can't show they're independent. Understanding that dependence on the parent is a legal presumption unless they show they have independence. They can always log back in to see the status, and again, help them understand that there are, if they get out of state, there are options for them to go back through the system. In terms of inquiries from campuses, most of the calls or emails we get are asking about the status of a termination, especially right before classes. I get that. What do they do if they're non-resident? Why did they get out of state? They don't know what to do next. And again, a lot of that is if they log in, they would see it. This is a somewhat common when you get an email back after running XRDO. This says request pending. Unfortunately, the wording wasn't the best. I think that's a colleague system error that is stuck on the colleague side. It has nothing to do with RDS. And one of the community college troubleshooting guys will show you how to clear that in colleague. If you have a doubt or getting other types of error messages, I'm happy to work with you to try to figure out where's the problem and direct you to a resource. So these are the most common questions we get from campuses. Immigration status, and we'll point out that there's of eligible statuses, which are all listed in the RDS guidebook. Some are permanent, some are temporary. And we go by immigration's definition. So if they are a permanent resident, asylee, refugee, they're indefinite. So we have an immigration database where we can look up details of students and where they are in the system. And basically it says indefinite. It's visas and what they call temporary protected status that have a fixed expiration date, and they may or may not get renewed. Those are the ones we have to track, and we'll talk about that in detail next session. They get flagged with a non-immigrant tracking. Depending on the visa type, some do get renewed, some don't. Some of them have, if it's a blanket under the parent, there's an age restriction and they'll expire at 24, if not earlier. So they would have to seek another visa on their own merit. So things like that we have to watch out for. If there's no status, there's no status, and there's not much we can do about that. And that includes someone who has applied for asylum and has no other status. Immigration considers them as having no status other than an application pending. And so temporarily they're allowed to stay, but there's no status. Going back to what, if you have anyone that falls in the category of recent arrivals from Afghanistan or Ukraine, I'm happy to look at those one-on-one with you, but most of them were not given a non-immigrant status. Most of them, or immigrant, were given what they call a humanitarian parole, which is a way they can very quickly move people to a safe place. And when they're here, they can apply for a status. Both of those countries have been designated for a temporary protected status, which can go pretty quickly once they apply. But unfortunately, asylees, the backlog is running years. And honestly, the larger percentage of them never get approved. So, we can't do it on because immigration says they don't have a status. So. Veterans, we talked about this. It's got to be handled at campus level because they have to have an award and use it. We had one a couple of years ago, angry vet that wouldn't give up and went to the governor and everybody else in the world and the VA said, no, he's not eligible. So we go with that. That's their exception, is that he had a benefit. He had just moved here, but he didn't want to use it. Well, it's tied to the benefit, not being a veteran. So that's the key thing to keep in mind. If the VA says they're good, they're good. If they don't have one or aren't approved, then they don't get this exception. They'd have to meet the requirements like everyone else. So I know it's a lot. I want to give a big overview for the new folks, but I want to talk about changes in the last year or two. So
before you do that, you want to go through these questions? I only have
Sure.
a few.
Yeah, let's do that first before I get into
Okay. The first one, it says, we had a student who has been financially independent for a few years, but is under the age of 24. He was asked to submit certain documents and would be asked to submit more documents. This went on for about 2 months before he came into the office, which is when we made the call to RDS with him in the office to see what he needed. His reconsideration just came back yesterday. Why didn't RDS ask for all the documentation necessary initially, and how should we approach this in the future?
Okay. What I would suggest is if you have one like that, call me and I can look up more detail. I don't know, because sometimes students will submit things that really it's not relevant. Sometimes we will ask for like a tax return, and instead they send us a utility bill. I mean, it depends on, it depends on what they were trying to validate or verify.
Okay.
Keep in mind that, even students with a dependency override of FAFSA, there's some similarities in definitions, but there are differences in state law for residency purposes of what's considered independent. We look at that and we take that into consideration as part of the big picture if there's been a dependency override, but there's still other pieces. So when you get into one like this that's that specific, it's probably best. I'm happy to review them one-on-one with you and find out. But a lot of times, like I have one student now that's complaining at university that I submitted 20 some documents. Yeah, they did on their own merit. We didn't ask for them. But it's things like the student wrote out a statement saying, I believe I should be a resident, and I'm signing this affidavit requesting that, and had it notarized. Well, that doesn't really mean anything to us. So it doesn't meet a legal requirement. So I'm happy to look at them one-on-one, but usually there's a reason. If there wasn't, well, we can address it with staff. Okay.
Okay. The next one, as it relates to the 1% of out of state, does it apply to all the exceptions or just the business transfer families?
Just that one. And here's where we'll go through that in more. You can look at the campus responsibility guide. It goes through every one of those in great detail, but we'll talk more about those in detail in the next session.
Okay. With the 4 reminders for documentation, would those be sent to the email they used?
Yes, the student has the option. They're asked to verify the email that they want these sent to. They also have the option they can opt in for text messages if they wish, or get both. So that's where they're asked to give an email where we can contact them with any questions.
Okay.
And it's also reminders, like if they start an application and save and don't come back, same thing, they get 4 reminders before it would time out.
Okay. And this next one, I think it is more of a statement than a question, so I won't read it.
Okay.
Okay, so you can go to the next one. That's it.
Okay. So changes over the last couple of years have been mostly about, some campus-based situations. Here are the 2 documents. The RDS guidebook is the public document. It's on the website. The second one is for campus use only, internal, and it looks at, for example, the exceptions you've talked about and what the requirements for each one are, how the campus should process it, and any documentation. When you have a campus-based exception, you need to collect documents showing justification that you gave that exception. Okay, if it's something RDS does, we've got it on file. So those are the key documents. And as I say, next session that we're going to schedule next month is going to go into detail into those people that really deal with those, detailed kinds of things about screening, coding, tracking, which ones are tracked for how long, like that one about the, 1%, things like that. So this is over the last couple of years. I reworked the immigration section in the guidebook to be arranged by type. Which type of status do you have? Before it was by forms and it was very confusing, but which categories qualify? Different ones were added. We clarified that about, when you turn 18, you're not automatically independent. You have to meet duration, but you have to show that, you're truly independent from the parents financially. It doesn't have to be 100%, but it has to be the larger portion. Okay, the parents could still give them something or another family member. Most of the other changes involve campus-based. We'll talk about it. A year ago, August, the Veterans Choice Act, they used to have a requirement that the exceptions were within the first 3 years of discharge. That has been eliminated. There's no time frame there. A student who, you might have some of these, if a student as a high school senior was here based on active military duty family member and they got that out in, generally that's good as long as when they start classes, that person's still here. So let's say that service member got transferred in April or May. Okay, they graduate in May. In the past, they would have been out of luck unless they qualify a different way. Once they're enrolled, they can keep it. They passed a provision that if the high school senior was already accepted, okay, and subsequently the service member gets transferred, they can keep it as long as they enroll the following fall semester. So again, if you get any of these in the weeds, nitty-gritty things you need help talking it through, we're happy to help. But that was a new provision signed into law. We talked about the being able to use the community college, the UNC full-time employee if they're eligible. Yeah, I clarified, like Apprentice North Carolina folks, we've said no. So basically that's CCP. As long as they're in high school, if they're dually enrolled in college classes, as long as it's part of that high school program, they don't have to come to RDS because you're not billing them, for the college classes. Once they graduate, before starting curriculum, they must come to RDS at that point. So we just added eligibility, not just for CCP, but the apprenticeship NC. And we let them know now that we try to automatically extend the due date. The system was set up that they were good for 15 months. And the concern was that you don't want to leave this open-ended because, the family could have moved and they decide 4 years later they're coming back kind of thing. However, what we do to help students, especially when they transfer or if they want to take a class at another institution for the summer, is if they are currently enrolled at any college or university, we're sending a file off to the clearinghouse twice a year, the end of fall and spring, and it will automatically extend their expiration date as long as they've been enrolled that year. Few exceptions, and one of them is if they have that exception like the out-in. It's not going to keep extending that. We're going to have to look at that, years later to see if the person's still stationed here. It will also not extend non-citizens that have an expiring visa. But most of your students should not have a problem, or if you have a student visiting, they're home for the summer from a university, they party too much, they need to take a class, hopefully these will all get extended and they won't have to come back to RDS. More recently, that exception we talked about for the US citizens who graduated from a US public high school, it must be public, and it's good for only 1 year of tuition calculated on the date of graduation. So as long as they enroll in the term that's within that year, they would be okay. And we talked about this. There was another one, by the way, for UNCs, but it's only if they're attending UNC that they, for years, have gone back and forth. If they have a full academic scholarship, they could get an adjustment. They were out of state. They excluded athletics. They've added it back now. They kind of go back and forth over the years. But that only applies for full-time students at a UNC campus. So those are the recent changes. As you see, most of them are fine-tuning kind of thing. Oh, there's one more I left off here. So in the Veterans Choice Act, the Chapter 35 was added effective this month, August 1st, as an eligible type of benefit. Most of your students getting benefits are probably going to fall within one of those. Everything else is the same. All it did was add another type of benefit to the existing list. So the folks in your campus who deal with financial aid and veterans issues will be familiar with that process, that it simply is giving them one more type of benefit that can get that and need to get that in-state tuition adjustment if they're non-residents. But everything else is the same. It just added one more to the list. It didn't change anything else. I always get questions about, so they're residents now. No, they're not residents now. They get in-state tuition, so they wouldn't qualify for state grants until they meet residency. And that campus responsibility guide is say, I'm ending up now in a minute here, that we're going to go through in more detail next time about approval of campus-based, things, documentation, tracking time limited. There's not a lot, but there's some like that time limited visa you need to track. It's not all non-citizens. It's only ones we flag. And we'll go through that. We've talked about documentation. There is no requirement for a campus to collect all kinds of information for residency, for tuition. If you're doing it, I mean, you're kind of adding work for yourself, unless it's needed for another reason. For example, in some of these cases, like veterans, it's a good example of veterans benefits. They have very clear requirements about what documentation needs to be kept. Well, that's a different reason, but we have some campuses trying to get like driver's licenses for every student and things like that. To me, you're putting a lot more work on yourselves. We don't collect them. We have concerns about all that, information with personal information. So that's why we validate as much as we can electronically. So that we don't collect the actual document. We, connect to the, in that case, DMV database or state taxes and say, hey, does this match up, and get a yes or no. So, but if you're giving an exception at the campus, you need to document that. And again, that campus manual will walk you through that, and we'll spend more time on that because those exceptions get a little tricky at times. Then in terms of resources, there's the public website. There's a lot of information on there, QAs that will help students. It has the actual guidebook as well as links to the state laws that we use. Has a dedicated call center just for RDS for these students as they're going through with their questions. Then, of course, we have the campus support line. Please don't give this to students. This actually brings to a different group of folks that are the ones who process and do the appeals to answer your more detailed questions about this. On the public website, there are links that you can get a copy of, for example, that campus manual that's password protected that we're attaching to this presentation. And finally, there is in the community college database there online, there are two key documents if you don't have, you want to get, is one of them is user guide of how to do, set up and periodic maintenance or calculating of continuous enrollment. But the second one is an FAQs about troubleshooting when like one determination isn't coming in as one example, or how do I handle it when there's a mismatch? So if you don't have those, you want to get a hold of them, especially that second one. And finally, my contact information is, again, I provide the official guidance to RDS and to campuses and publish the guidebooks. And if you have any information about the campus-based exceptions, track responsibilities, if I can't help you, I can direct you to the right person. So as I said, next session, we'll talk about those campus-based exceptions in more detail because those get a little complex. And that's it. Thanks for your attention. I know that's a huge overview, but let's take questions now.
And I know we're gonna plan that campus-based exceptions within the next couple of weeks in September. So
right,
that should be coming up. Yeah. I do have one question that's on here in the chat box. Is
okay.
and maybe more of a statement / question. We have a student that attended in the past that was using her veteran benefits. She was getting the in-state rate using the waiver of the 12-month residency requirement for veterans. She provided us the U.S. with the certificate of eligibility and submitted of a letter of intent to establish residency in North Carolina. She was enrolled for a few semesters. She then moved to California. After 2 years, she returned to North Carolina and was readmitted. She never established residency in North Carolina. And when RDS determined her to be out of state, when she was readmitted, she had never established residency in North Carolina. She is using her VA benefits again. The RDS Campus Responsibility Guide does give any guidance on what to do if the student is readmitted and has not reestablished residency?
To me, that I would defer to talking to your folks in VA, because at the one hand, I mean, she's moved back. If she has the benefit, they're probably going to tell you to go ahead, as long as she's using the benefit, okay? But the fact that she didn't establish it, although if she moved away and said she's moving back and wants to establish it now, they may say yes. But I would defer to them, because really it's their criteria that set that. But yes, they're supposed to. In theory, this isn't like a for life, because I'm a veteran, I'm always going to get in state. It's supposed to be to help folks, especially, you know, when they move around a lot in the military. And that's why initially it was first 3 years after discharge, that, you know, to establish roots and to, you know, establish permanent residency. But I have a feeling they're going to say, you know, because of the wording of the law, that as long as they're using the benefit. But, you know, what happens when they don't meet that 12-month agreement? Because she moved and came back, they're probably going to say, okay, but I would defer to your folks that work on the VA certifications to, you know, ask for guidance.
Yeah, because she was out for two years.
Yeah.
Also, if you have any questions that relate to colleague, these are Nigerian questions, please submit a incident support ticket. And so someone can help ask those questions, because there's a question in here about the process, which screens to use. So that's probably an incident question you need to submit. There's another one, Muncie, I looked away for a moment. Can you please post the help number for campuses? Could you put your slide back up, Gene, and provide that number?
Hold on.
And the slides, just so you know, the slides are in the calendar invite. So you can just go to the calendar invite we sent out, and all the slides should be there. All the attachments. So you can look at it there.
Working on it, just a second here. You want the campus number, right? You see that?
Yes.
Okay, it's at the top there. That's the phone number for campuses and the email for campuses.
And for those who may have called in, the campus number is 844-417-0164. Again, that's 844-417-0164. But again, these slides are available on the calendar.
It's in the slides, and then all of this is also in that campus responsibility guide. I tried to give as many tools as I could. All those phone numbers and contact information are also at the beginning of that document.
Someone asks, is there a document that exists with screenshots or breakdown that explains the XRDS screen or the CFNC screen?
So the XRDS is in colleague. Again, go to those system office documents pertaining to colleague, and that will walk you through the colleague process of the residency side. So that's not an RDS thing, that's a system office in this case.
Yes.
In terms of the CFNC, I guess you're talking about the dashboard you get for applications and everything. So that should be in that documentation of pulling in, that you have pulling in if you're using the Common App.
Yes, because Ms. Brawley's done several trainings on it, so I know there's documentation.
Right.
Yeah. And that is all the questions I have for right now. One more just popped up.
Yes.
If a student between 19 and 24 answers no to parent financial independence, will they need to submit tax information to prove independence, or does anything else populate in the online interview prompt to prompt the student to send documents? Also, is there any way for someone under 18 to be considered financially independent?
Okay. So yes, if they say they're independent, okay, the system will then ask them a series of questions about employment and income and what their income is, and ask them other things such as, are you receiving, Medicaid, food stamps, anything that might contribute to being independent. If they say, for example, yeah, I filed taxes, I made $2,000 last year, that's not going to fly. That's not, a lot of the ones that come through and say they're independent, there's no way they're going to be able to cover, their expenses on that. Even going part-time to community college. I mean, it's, if they're saying they're living on their own, they have a lease, and, they have no other source of income or financial aid, that's not, they have to show they're meeting all of those things. So yes, the interview will ask. At that point, no, we won't ask about tax documents because we can identify, well, we might. If they come back and say, because we can also see if they have a regular job paid like in a W-2, we can see the employment through the state employment security. So, if we see yes, and we can verify, yes, they're making a certain amount of money, they're okay. If they say, no, it's wrong, I made a lot more than that, they can, at that point, we'll ask for a tax return because, a lot of them say, oh, well, I work for cash, or I work for this. Well, if it's on your tax return, we'll take it. Or I have an out-of-state employer that doesn't report through North Carolina. Okay, at that point, we would ask for tax information. But if, so it depends. We'll first try to validate as much as we can electronically. If not, they can come back, and if they have documentation, we'll look at it. But it does ask those questions. The other question was about somebody under 18. Under 18 does not have the legal ability to be independent unless they were emancipated by the court, which could happen at 16 or 17, that legally declares them to be as an adult and have the legal capacity. Or if they marry, we consider them independent based on that. Other than that, legally, they cannot be considered independent to establish their own domicile. They're a minor. They don't have the legal ability to establish one separate from their parent. Hope that helps.
Yes, that helps. And that is all the questions, sir.
Okay.
Oh, there's a hand raised that just came up. Adonna Hall, you had a question?
Yes, good morning. I did have a question just because I want to make sure I instructed the student correctly. We had a student attend with us, and she and her family, I believe she is a citizen, but her parents are not. And they have lived here in North Carolina for several years, but did not have anything anchoring them, if you will, to North Carolina. So they did not have a registered vehicle in their name, live with a friend, and all those good things. So what would be in terms of documentation for verification? Is there a special documentation included in the guidebook or anything like that that we could provide for them, or is it just always a good rule of thumb to send them to you all?
Okay. So in a case like that, if they're getting out of state on the IC, have them do an appeal. But there is a document on the public website that addresses students in that scenario. And it gives an example of what kinds of information we could use. In some cases, the parents might have a ITIN, a tax ID number. That is enormously helpful. And sometimes they file taxes with that TIN. And right there, that's a big step forward. We probably need something else, but it really depends on, on the scenario. If they're starting with nothing, or if there's something and we're adding to it. Sometimes we've had to cobble things together between, if it's a high school transcript showing that they're there at that address and that's the parent's contact, we've taken utility bills, leases. It is possible to get a vehicle registered and not have, a status. So we really try to, at that point, if they truly have little or nothing, it's probably best they come in for an appeal, and then the staff can talk to them and find out what they have or what they're willing to share. But I mean, there's been times we really had to try to piece it together with several things, and it's probably going to depend on their scenario. But again, if there's a document in there for parents and students that detail what kinds of things that could be helpful if they have them. But they're probably going to end up an appeal if they truly have nothing we can do electronically. But if they have a tax return they file with the TIN, that is a big step forward right there.
So question, if the person can show they lived with family friends for 5 years, would that work for this scenario?
Nope. It must be, according to law, if the parents are not in North Carolina, it must be an adult relative. Now, if someone's getting older, you know, they should be able to show independence. But, you know, when I hear someone's been living with friends or something for 10 years, I mean, I find it hard to believe that it's for younger, you know, kids when they're younger, that someone didn't involve DHHS to appoint a court guardian or something if they were here unaccompanied. But it certainly happens that once they're 16, 17 or whatever, certainly by then, no one's going to say anything if someone's taken them in. But with that family friend, we get that a lot with folks that the parents are living in another country and are sending, you know, the student here to try to go to school or whatnot. And it's just not going to work until they can show independence, or if it was a relative, you know, that could work.
And that's all the questions there.
Yeah. I want to go back to one Miss Hall. I see she mentioned something like that is, you know, you all don't need to get into all that. They could send it to RDS and we'll sort that out. I mean, to save your time of, you know, like, well, I found out it was the family's friend's name and whatnot. I mean, that's some of what we can sort out if you want to make it easier for you. I mean, you're welcome to do that. And I know we all want to do things to help students. The one thing I would caution campuses on, when this came up recently, is reportedly at one campus, and it was verified that they probably did it, the staff member trying to help students sits down and creates a login and types everything in for them. The student who got out of state said that's not true, that's the wrong information. So when we said, well, you did this, the student's gone back now and is complaining to the college that person created it and gave wrong information. So don't put yourself keying information or giving too much advice is my suggestion. But and we straightened it out. It turns out, I think they were trying to help them, but it turns out they assumed certain things and put in wrong information. The student failed. So we had to work with the student to correct that. But yeah, I mean, RDS will look at all that with you. I will say most people, you know, end up getting in that scenario about the, you know, the parents are here. If they're here, I mean, we usually find something, we're able to piece something together, but there's some of them that are not here, and we just have to take a reasonable effort to try to do it. And we'll find out what they have and ask them a series of questions of all the things we might use till we find something we can use.
All right, are there any other questions? Okay, there are none at this point, so I would say, Gene, thank you for your time. And the
Thank you all.
information was wonderful information, and I will send out the calendar invite for the next setup for the next training. And thank you all for taking your time today to be on this call.
Yeah, thank you all very much. And, you know, please let us know how we can help you. RDS is not trying to turn students away. We're just trying to, you know, follow what's in law and, you know, do what we can. But we always look for ways to try to find a way to qualify students whenever possible.
Yeah.
So thank you all. The next session will go into more detail of those campus-based exceptions and the things you have to track at your end.
All right. Thanks, sir.
Thank you all so much.
You all have a good day.
You know where I live. You can
Yes,
come-
we know how to find you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. I'm going to stop recording now.